Debbie, to be able to spend some additional time with you. We've been able to have conversations in the past, and I always welcome more conversations, more opportunities to connect. So I'll just start by saying I'm Kim Hiscott. I'm the Executive Director of Andrew Fleck Children's Services. I'm also a registered early childhood educator, and most recently we licensed a program in the forest called Forest Explorers, but under the Child Care and Early Years Act here in Ontario, Canada. So it's a fully licensed program, but we spend all of our time outside and not really much time in the building that we built. And so, Debbie, I'm going to ask you to just introduce yourself before we get into the actual questions.
Sure. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm Debbie Groff, Child Care Deputy Senior Administrator with the Department of Children, Youth, and Families in Washington State. I also oversee all of our outdoor nature-based licensing processes in the state of Washington.
And we've looked on at the state of Washington with great envy for quite some time from Canada, as your neighbors from Canada, because you've done this amazing journey of being able to license outdoor programs. So I'd like to understand how you got started. Was there a particular person or event or something that served as a catalyst? Basically, how did you make licensing happen?
Sure, it was a wonderful journey, and it actually started out with a collaborative effort with our already functioning nature-based providers in Washington State. So we had a group of folks that were working with children in forest settings, park settings, but they were doing it under what we call an exempt status. So they didn't require a child care license at the time because they were operating with preschool students for 4 hours or less, which is one of our exemption categories in Washington. So those folks had an interest in extending their day to offer a full day of care to families, to better support working families. And so they brought their ideas to the table, to the department. We worked with we did a collaborative ask for a bill to say, we really think we should explore trying to license full day preschool age kiddos in nature-based settings. The bill was adopted and it gave us a 5-year pilot timeframe to just do that, to see if we needed to waive our already existing childcare rules or maybe come up with something very specific for these nature-based programs. So we spent 5 years, again, in complete coordination with the folks who were interested in this adventure. We brought in other folks that didn't know that the bill was going through, but actually learned about it later on and became a part of our pilot process. And we worked together in tandem to establish a set of what we called at that time touchstone standards. So a set of standards that we would have folks follow, we would monitor to, and we would see how successful those rules would be for the children and the programs themselves. So we did that for about 3 or 4 years, and we actually found that it was quite successful. But I think the reason that those rules were successful is because we built them in coordination with the folks who were really our subject matter experts, and those were the people who were doing this type of education with kids in a forest or a park setting. We pushed forward legislation following our pilot that said, yes, indeed, we think we need to permanently license nature-based programs, and we need to, in order to really honor the pedagogy of nature-based programming, establish a set of rules specific to those environments. And so we did. But when we asked legislation to put this forward, they said, yes, indeed, you did such a great job with these preschool kiddos. We're going to let you also license school age programs as well, or a combination of preschool and school age. So that set us a little back. We had to go back to the drawing board to ensure that our touchstone standards that we were looking at really aligned with a school age child development lens. And so we were able to put forward a set of rules for outdoor nature-based programming that ran from a preschool age child all the way through a school age child. And those rules actually went through our process without a single public comment, which is very rare And again, I attribute that to the fact that it was just a collaborative effort to build those rules that we did. I think the department did a fantastic job of listening to people, to really honing in on what is risky play, what are safe havens around risky play, and how do we make that a successful adventure for folks. So we licensed folks starting in 2023. We've done that for a couple years. The rules went into effect in 2021. We had to transition our pilot participants over, which took a little bit of time, but we are successful now in licensing programs in Washington State under their own specific nature-based rules, and the interest is growing. It had a little bubble right after COVID with some interest, and now we're seeing kind of an uptick again, where we have folks really reaching out to try to figure out how to work within either their neighborhood park, their own land parcels, or perhaps forest grounds. So we are well on our way to licensing about 20 programs. We service about 350 children, and of those kids, about 80 to 90 are receiving what we call our statewide subsidy dollars. So for families who qualify for Working Connections childcare, we are able to afford those folks some financial assistance, and our kids are coming to us from all avenues of families and makeups and geographics. And I think we're trying to, in that adventure, really take a look at the equitable approach to nature-based programming. And by providing this financial support, we are reaching out to families who may not have even thought they could qualify for such help in the past. So long-winded answer, Kim, that, but there you go. That's a
No,
journey in a nutshell.
that was perfect, and what an amazing journey you've been on. What an adventure, as you said, and that was an excellent summary. And in particular, it stood out to me that how you emphasize the groundswell by connecting with your community, by listening to those that were already involved, connected, experts, wanted to see this happen. You were able to the listening mattered, and it certainly obviously made a difference. Like no public comments is just so impressive.
Yeah,
Um,
that's pretty impressive.
mhm. Um, but I did hear you say that it's preschool and school age only. So what about infants and toddlers? Any thought given to the younger age groups yet?
Yeah, absolutely a curiosity around that. We have had folks kind of come to us and ask those questions. During the pilot and even through some of our licensing adventures, we've offered a couple waivers to our existing providers to bring their own infant into the realm of programming, but that infant isn't enrolled in programming. That infant is really just attached more to the parent. The parent then can't be a part of the ratio because we didn't want to have them pay attention to their child, which they absolutely need to, and still be responsible for the children that were in care. But it's kind of a way for us to kind of get one little toe in the water to try to figure out how could we do this. And again, going back to the folks who are doing that, might have an infant with them during program hours, and asking them, okay, you've spent all day outside with that kiddo, how did that work, and what have you learned from that? The programs that have been doing that, they both have a residence right around the corner that they live in, so they were able to work with their partner to, if the baby needed to go inside for any reason, whether it be weather patterns or just the baby just needed to be inside, they had that afforded to them. But what it did, Kim, is just open up an avenue for thinking and for
Mhm.
wondering, and that's what we're in the midst of doing right now. We're having to do a little bit more research, because when we did our research during the pilot, we were very focused on preschool age children. So now we need to kind of do a little stretching and looking into countries that may have been doing this infant toddler care for a very long time, and ask them, what routes did they take? What are the things that they do, and how do they explore that being very positive, and those positive impacts for those littles as they're in those outdoor environments in all weather patterns. So we've got some research to do, but it is something, I think, again, that our provider world is going to keep knocking on our door, because they're very, very interested in this. They're trying to take, again, the look of the whole child's journey from their birth until they enter the public school setting or a private school setting when they're age 5 or 6. So they're thinking about it, and I know that they will keep coming to us, which I think is wonderful because we built that partnership in the past. And I think we'll just try to keep exploring together and learning from each other as to possibilities in the future.
Oh, that's just amazing. And I love that phrase, an avenue for thinking and wondering together. I think that if we always framed every one of our intentionalities with that as a focus, I think we could do really wonderful work.
Yeah.
So what does funding look like? What do parent fees look like compared to traditional license programs in Washington State?
Yeah, during the pilot, we actually looked at that, looked at budgets of our programs and looked at what they were charging private pay. I'll say that private pay families who because of their financial situation didn't necessarily qualify for any assistance. And what we found is it was quite comparable to what our centers, our child care center facilities were charging around the state. And what they told us is the offset of the charge and how they were thinking through it was they saved so much money in their facility of not having an actual facility and a facility cost and a facility maintenance. But where it kind of balanced out was the uptick in what they paid their professionals.
Mm.
And so it was very comparable. So what centers were, drawing in their budget was looking very similar to what outdoor nature-based providers were drawing in for their budget. And so the cost to families looked pretty equitable across the board. Those costs in Washington State vary from where you live in Washington State. It's very, very different, right? If you're downtown in the Seattle area, prices are quite high for about everything, but also the minimum wage is higher in the Seattle area. So, but basically, when we really looked at it, it just kind of leveled out. Families were paying about what they would pay for a traditional setting in their same community as to attend an outdoor nature-based program.
But with that, though, the savings, that was really interesting what you said. The savings were then passed on to compensation for the educator. So the educator compensation rate in your nature-based programs is traditionally higher.
It is a little higher, and
Yeah.
I think that also equates to the fact that they have a few more qualifications to have before they come to the forest, right? We really need learned people. We need folks who really understand to an even different level of how to engage children, how to supervise children with no fences, how to ensure, and you do that through that engagement in programming as well as just where your staff are and how they move about their program. But we also had to have them understand maybe a level of wilderness first aid versus traditional first aid based on location and distance from emergency services. And also they just need to have a real clear understanding of the pedagogy of nature-based programming, as well as what do children really glean from being educated in nature. And so their flora and fauna skills have to be a little higher than what we might see in a traditional setting. And they need to understand, foraging and what are safe plants that you can forage and what are not. And so there is a different expectation of our staff who work in nature-based programming. First and foremost, it equates to child safety, but then it also equates to the fact that if you're using nature as your first teacher, you really have to understand how that works.
Yeah, it's so logical.
Yeah.
That makes so much sense. So are the additional qualifications actually embedded in the legislation? Is that a part of
They
it?
are. They're embedded in our Washington Administrative Code. So, and that again, we worked with our providers at the time during our pilot to establish that. And that was twofold. That was not only to ensure that our children would be with the safest of people and the most knowledgeable of people, but also to protect the pedagogy. Because it's not enough to go, and I'm doing air quotes that you can't see me do, but outside with children. Outside is a great place to take kids, right? And our traditional childcare settings have that outside experience with children. But we take our children, what we say in our program is outdoors. And outdoors is different. Outdoors means you're taking them into that natural environment as first teacher, And so it ups the ante of understanding of nature as nurturer and as primary educator. And so when you do that, it just really ups that respect and honoring of a pedagogy that we've all just fallen in love with over the past few years.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. It just it feels right. Your words are quite poignant to say we need to honor the pedagogy. We need to understand it. We need the additional qualifications. Yes, the safety obviously matters, but ensuring also that respect for being outdoors versus outside. That
Right.
just makes so much sense. That's amazing. So what's next? Any other states are you aware of, or is anybody else in the US interested?
They are just on the cusp, and we are very fortunate to have been able to engage with other states and to visit with them. Oregon, which is a state just right south of Washington, they're actually there. So they've formed legislation. They're waiting for everything to go through. We are in partnership to help train their outdoor nature-based licensing staff. It's really easy to do with Oregon because they are just right there near Washington, but we've also been engaging with other states like Colorado and Minnesota and Michigan to help them with the next leg of the race. It's one thing to say, okay, we should do this, and they might even promulgate rule or think about the best rules to wrap around these kiddos, but then you have to get the workforce ready to go, right? Not only our internal workforce, our licensing workforce, but then again the outdoor nature-based professionals who are going to be in the forest to teach our children. So there's just a trickle down effect, and again, Washington we've tried what we've could put out there. We didn't know for sure exactly what to do because it was brand new for us, but we've learned a lot through our adventure. We share that with other states, and I was at the Natural Start Alliance conference this last summer, and there is just growing curiosity, and states are just right there. I think we made it through a pandemic. I think the pandemic taught us even more the importance of taking our children outdoors in nature, and so I think folks are really looking forward to growing this not only at a state level, but there is a large impetus at looking at this at a national or a regional support for states. And then we're looking, of course, at an advertisement campaign, because what we really need to do is help our families understand the importance of nature-based programming and keeping our kids in those settings so that they can be nurtured in that, grow emotionally in that, and just become those future stewards that we're all just so hopeful to have in our midst as we grow older.
Right, right. That's so exciting that the other states have that same enthusiasm. And we definitely have that same enthusiasm here in Ontario and elsewhere across Canada, and we want to follow in your footsteps as well. So I'm going to ask you sort of two questions. The
Okay.
first one is specifically about the concept of a pilot under your legislative framework, because what we've been told, and obviously, what happens in the Washington state and what happens in Ontario could be quite different, but we've been told that it's not possible to do a pilot under a legislation under an entity that is legislated, like licensing childcare. And so, curious how you make that happen, or did you have that as a restriction? But then also, what are your recommendations for us? What should we do first?
Yeah, it's an exciting question. We were very fortunate in Washington, and maybe it's just in how our government is built, but we, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families, regulate to all childcare. So we don't work with other departments to do this work. And I know in Canada that there's a whole bunch of folks involved in your licensing process and in your monitoring process. And so we were very fortunate in that we could just deal with our department when it came to building out the pilot need and then moving forward with rule formation and moving forward to just having legislators say, yep, go with this. So I think that's where we were at an advantage as such. I've heard from folks in Canada. I think every province is a little bit different as to who does what with childcare and early learning. And so you've got a lot of players that are involved in your systems, where we were very fortunate that it was like one agency and one group of legislators that were representing, of course, our public. But it was just easier, I think, for us to streamline our efforts because we were with our providers. We didn't have to pull in like the Department of Health or other agencies because we take that charge on. We have that jurisdiction to license our providers. So I think that's one very, very big difference between Washington state and some of the provinces in Canada. And then your next question of where do we go from here? And again, I don't understand your entire government breakdown. I don't understand exactly, and every province is different, and everyone has shared with me. And I always think, wow, even though they're right next to each other, it's very different there, right? And again, my takeaway every time I talk to folks in Canada is that you just have a lot of players. You have a lot of people very interested in ensuring that children are in quality programming in their early years. And so I don't know exactly how you do it, but my recommendation is that you keep bringing every single person who impacts that, whether it be licensing or just early care or whatever it is that you would call it, keep bringing them to the table. Everybody has to be in this together. This is an absolute united front. I think you've learned some wonderful things in some of your cases and studies in Canada that are already proving this is where children should be, right? You don't have to sell people on that. They know that part. Now it's a matter of then let's all get to a place where we can see how to do this as a team. And I think, from the very beginning of this interview, I talked about that importance of collaborating with the people in the know, the people who are already successful. You have to keep bringing them to the table as well. And then every single entity that impacts the possibility or the wonder of being able to really honor this outdoor nature-based pedagogy in a licensing perspective, just keep bringing them in. And again, you don't typically have to convince people this is the right thing to do for children. You have to convince them how to sit down to make your systems line up.
Yes, oh, that's perfect. That's great advice. Oh, well, Debbie, thank you so very much. This was really helpful. I suspect that it's probably going to prompt many more conversations and questions, and that's exactly what we wanted.
I hope so.
Yes, we want people to be thinking about this differently. Definitely, as you said, it's not that we have to convince people that this is the right thing to be doing, that being outdoors is where we want to be with children. It's just figuring out a bit more of the how and ensuring that it's a bit more equitable, that more children can be outdoors and all ages as well. So
yes.
Thank you for your time, and I know we're going to be continuing the conversations.
You're so very welcome, and thank you for inviting me in.
Okay, Louise, what do you think?